So what does it really mean to be free?
You don't really know what freedom means until you're about to lose it.
There's a lot of different ways to answer this question, but one way is to think of it as the freedom from enslavement. Being able to resist tyranny in all its forms, because those who would deny freedom to others don't deserve it for themselves, and under a just God cannot long retain it. Another way is to think of freedom as the right to say what you believe, to speak the truth and to express who you really are in an honest way, because being free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. But for me, maybe the highest form of freedom comes from the realization that you are not a prisoner of the past, that you have the power to reimagine and redirect your life. And so whatever it is that brought you here, you can begin again and tell a new story about who you are. The Shawshank Redemption explores a lot of these themes and what it means to be free. It's one of my favorite movies, and I love that there's lots of people out there now watching it for the first time and sharing their reactions to it. Some say it changed their lives. The film critic Roger Ebert said that, in a lot of ways, The Shawshank Redemption plays more like a spiritual experience than a movie. And even today, it's one of the most loved films of all time. And I think a big reason for that is it's not really the surface story about a bunch of convicts trying to survive inside a prison, although that is where a lot of the plot happens. The movie is really a metaphor for all the ways we become prisoners in our own lives. Maybe it's working in a job that makes you feel miserable. Maybe it's dealing with an addiction or being in a bad relationship, a painful past you can't let go of. Whatever it might be, it's often the unconscious stories we tell ourselves that keep us trapped in the cycles of pain and trauma. But the central message of the movie is that whatever jail you might find yourself in, there is a way to break free. And you find it when you realize that you are the storyteller of your life, the author of what comes next. And if you don't like where your story's going, you can reshape it and move beyond the unconscious patterns that are holding you back. So how do you do that? Let me show you. The story begins here, with Andy Dufresne, an innocent man who's sent to prison for a crime he didn't commit. On the outside, he's successful, the vice president of a bank. But all of it comes to an end when he's wrongfully convicted for the murder of his wife and her lover. So in 1947, he's sent to Shawshank Penitentiary to serve 2 life sentences in a row. What's interesting is that we don't see Andy's story from his point of view. Instead, everything is told through the eyes of a man named Red, another inmate, the narrator of the film. And on the inside, he's a very useful man to know. If there's something you need, he can get it for you. Cigarettes, a bottle of brandy, a poster, nearly anything within reason. Red is a good man, but he's cynical about human nature. He doesn't believe that people ever really change. We see him for the first time here, at his parole hearing, where he tries to convince the panel that he's rehabilitated and that prison has changed him for the better. But he doesn't really believe what he's saying, because nothing inside the prison system is designed to rehabilitate anyone. All it teaches is blind obedience and conformity. And so Red sees hope as a harmful and dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane, he says. The only way to survive and make it through the day-to-day realities of life inside the prison is to give up all the illusions you have about hope. Andy, on the other hand, sees hope as a good thing. And you need it so that you never forget that there are places in the world that aren't made of stone, that there's something inside you they can't get to, that they can't touch because it's yours. Hope. This sets up the central question of the film. Is it better to live with hope or without it? Is hope a harmful delusion that makes our lives worse, or is it something we should protect and hang on to? For the rest of the movie, we see how Andy, Red, and the other prisoners answer this question through the choices they make and how it plays out in their lives. And so the movie is really a debate between these 2 different points of view. We see one possibility through the character of Brooks Hatlen. He's an inmate who runs the prison library. On the inside, he's a loved and trusted friend to everyone. But one day, he's released. You'd think this would be the happiest day of his life, but it's just the opposite. He's terrified of the world outside Shawshank and struggles with life as a free man. Why? Brooks is institutionalized, Red says. Man's been in here 50 years. This is all he knows. In here he's an important man, an educated man. Outside he's nothing. Just a used-up con with arthritis in both his hands. I'm telling you, these walls are funny. First you hate them, and then you get used to them. Enough time passes, it gets so you depend on them. That's institutionalized. They send you here for life, that's exactly what they take. The part that counts, anyway. He moves into a halfway house and finds a job baking groceries, but he can't deal with how much the world has changed. I don't like it here. I'm tired of being afraid all the time. I've decided not to stay. I doubt they'll kick up any fuss. Not for an old crook like me. And then he ends his life in that room. Brooks represents the dark future that's waiting for every one of the prisoners inside Shawshank if they don't find a way to keep going. What can they do? The author Emily Esfahani Smith explores this in her book, The Power of Meaning, Crafting a Life That Matters. She asks, why do some people end their own lives? We often assume that it has to be because they're unhappy. But research shows that how happy you are doesn't predict whether you'll succumb to despair. Instead, the most important factor is whether you see your life as meaningful. It turns out that meaning makes us more resilient in the face of pain and loss. And it gives us a reason to keep going because someone who has a why to live can bear almost any how. That's what Andy is able to find on the inside, and he does it in a way that subverts a lot of our expectations. When he first comes to Shawshank, no one thinks he's going to last very long. He spends a lot of time reading the Bible and collecting rocks he finds in the courtyard. Red helps him get a small rock hammer, and he uses it to turn stones into chess pieces. And we find out that Andy is a lot more resilient than he seems. He had a quiet way about him. He had a walk and a talk that just wasn't normal around here. He strolled like a man in a park, without a care or a worry in the world, like he had an invisible coat that somehow shielded him from this place. Andy makes his first big move here. On the rooftop, when some of the prisoners are sent to work on it. We overhear one of the guards, a man named Captain Hatlen, saying that he just inherited $35,000. But now he has to hire a lawyer and pay taxes on it, and he hates dealing with lawyers. Andy sees an opportunity here, but one of the unspoken rules is that you're never supposed to interrupt a guard in the middle of a job, and yet he takes the chance anyway. You know, there is a way for you to keep all that money without paying any taxes and without hiring a lawyer, and it's perfectly legal. Andy offers to do all the paperwork and set up the tax-free gift, nearly free of charge. I'd only ask 3 beers apiece for each of my coworkers. I think a man working outdoors feels more like a man if he can have a bottle of suds. That's just my opinion, sir. Unbelievably, it works. In one of the most beautiful scenes, they sit and drink with the sun on their shoulders and feel like free men for the first time in ages. We could have been tarring the roof on one of our own houses, Red says. We were the lords of all creation. For me, this scene captures one of the most important and fundamental truths about life. There is no perfect moment to start living. There will never be a more perfect time in the future when everything lines up flawlessly and you can finally start enjoying your life. This is it. It's right now, because life can only ever be lived here, in the present. All of life is an act of faith. The moment you take a step, the moment you take a journey, the moment you enter into any kind of human undertaking, that is an act of faith. You see, you've given yourself up, but this is the most powerful thing that can be done. Because if you slow down and really pay attention, you'll find moments where life is offering us little opportunities to grow and evolve. So why not take the chance? For Andy, his boldness pays off and sets up all kinds of new opportunities. Word spreads that he's good with numbers and paperwork. The warden gets him to do the bookkeeping for the prison, and then he puts him in charge of the library. Little by little, his life begins to change. All of it leads to Andy's most meaningful project yet, Tommy Williams, a young man who's been in and out of jail since he was 13. I want to finish my high school equivalency, he says. The problem is that Tommy can't read, and he's never really believed in himself. It's a long road, but they start from the beginning, making a little bit of progress every day. He takes the test, and when the results come back, he's stunned to find that he passed. It's proof that they don't have to spend their sentence wasting away in a prison cell, and they can accomplish something Shawshank was never designed to do: rehabilitation. This is how you transform your life, and it's how you create meaning. Emily Asfahani Smith says that the people who live the most meaningful lives are givers. They use their talents to make the world better in their own way, even if that contribution might seem small. Because there's no such thing as a small act of kindness. Every small, unselfish act nudges the world onto a better path, and an accumulation of small acts can change the world. So ask yourself, what is your unique gift? What are the things that light you up and fill you with hope for the future? And how can you offer it to the world? There will, of course, always be some people who say, "Look, this is just a movie. Movies can't teach us anything about real life." But even if you think that, there are real examples of people who've been wrongfully imprisoned. One of the most harrowing examples is the real-life story of Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. In 1945, he was living in the Soviet Union when he made the mistake of writing a private letter to a friend and criticized the Russian leader Joseph Stalin. For this, he was arrested and sent to the Gulag, the Soviet prison camps where convicts were forced to work 12 and 14-hour days in the freezing cold. He was released 11 years later, in 1956, and found a job teaching secondary school during the day. But at night, he was secretly writing a manuscript that would become his most famous work, the Gulag Archipelago, which exposed the horrors of the Soviet prison camp system. He often wondered, is there anything that could save the world? One possibility came from the Russian author Dostoevsky, who said that beauty will save the world. But Solzhenitsyn wondered how that could possibly be true. When in history did beauty ever save anyone from anything? Maybe it uplifted or inspired some people, sure. But who has it saved? And yet he goes on to say that there is a certain peculiarity in the essence of beauty in art. The convincingness of a true work of art is completely irrefutable, and it forces even an opposing heart to surrender. A work of art bears within itself its own verification. They take hold of us, compel us, and nobody ever, not even in the ages to come, will ever refute them. Beauty has a way of preserving the soul. In the Gulag, there were prisoners who would memorize lines of poetry to keep themselves going. And in the evenings, when feelings of despair really set in, they saw that even a single line of a simple poem whispered to another inmate in the dark could be a lifeline to help them survive the horrors of what they were going through. There's a scene where Andy looks through some boxes in the prison library and finds an old record. It's Mozart's opera from The Marriage of Figaro. He puts it on and suddenly he has a wild idea. He locks the door and he plays it over the prison speakers. And as it plays, everyone stops what they're doing to listen. Imagine how that would feel. You spent years in the same prison courtyard doing the exact same routine day after day for decades. You haven't heard a song or a melody in ages. And then you hear this. I have no idea, to this day, what those two Italian ladies were singing about, Red says. The truth is, I don't want to know. Some things are best left unsaid. I like to think they were singing about something so beautiful it can't be expressed in words. It makes your heart ache because of it. I tell you, those voices soared, higher and farther than anybody in A Great Place Dares to Dream. It was like some beautiful bird flapped into our drab little cage and made those walls dissolve away. And for the briefest of moments, every last man at Shawshank felt free. The bird is a powerful symbol we see again and again. Early in the film, we learn that Brooks was feeding a small crow he found outside. It was wounded after falling out of a tree. I'm going to look after him until he's big enough to fly, he says. Beauty has the power to lift us out of despair, to help us find hope in the future. But it's fragile, and like an injured bird, you have to nurture it and keep it alive. But when you do, the experience of beauty is transcendent. And so Dostoevsky was right when he said that beauty will save the world, but only if we take the time to cultivate it. And that means stopping to really notice and pay attention to the beauty that's all around us. So ask yourself, what can you do to tune into the beauty of the world? How can you make more time for music, art, and nature, and appreciate the incredible miracle of what it means to be alive? In 1970, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn won the Nobel Prize in Literature. His time in the gulags helped him realize that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, but right through every human heart. And through all human hearts, this line shifts. Inside of us, it oscillates with the years, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. And even in the best of hearts, there remains an unuprooted small corner of evil. It's impossible to expel evil from the world in its entirety, but it's possible to constrict it within each person. We all have the capacity for good and evil. It's central to what the psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is the unconscious part of us that we don't want to see, the parts of ourselves we've been taught to reject. And so it's pushed away, deep into the subconscious mind. Here it becomes a storehouse of socially unacceptable feelings like aggression or envy. But it also holds within it the positive parts of us that we've left behind in our childhood, like imagination or creativity. The problem is that repressing the shadow doesn't make it disappear. It unconsciously influences everything we do, resurfacing in ways that are compulsive and irrational. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. When someone refuses to look at their shadow, when they won't admit their own unwanted thoughts and feelings, they unconsciously project them onto other people, and they end up doing all kinds of destructive things without realizing why they're doing it. We see this with the warden. In public, he presents himself as a good Christian man who runs the prison. He quotes the Bible saying, "I am the light of the world," and he sees himself as a kind of savior, surrounded by bad and immoral criminals. But behind closed doors, he's completely corrupt. He takes bribes. He's involved in all kinds of illegal schemes to make himself rich, and he's using Shawshank to launder the money, all the while acting like he's helping the community. This is common for people in positions of power who try to rationalize the idea that they somehow deserve the money they're taking because of all the good intentions they have. They start out by taking just a small amount, but before you know it, they're openly stealing, and little by little, they slide into corruption. Some of the worst evils are done by people who believe they're doing good. And that's why the warden makes Andy do all the paperwork, to hide his criminal activity. There's a river of dirty money running through this place, Andy says. The problem is it leaves a huge paper trail. You can't hide it forever, and the trail always leads to someone. Andy's plan is to make it lead to someone he's completely made up, a man named Randall Stevens who doesn't really exist except on paper. That's how he'll hide the warden's corruption. The funny thing is, on the outside, I was an honest man. I had to come to prison to be a crook. But the warden keeps abusing his power. There's a horrific scene where he meets with Tommy, and the warden has him murdered to make it look like he was trying to escape. And just like that, all his hope for the future is violently crushed. It pushes Andy to the brink of despair. You think you'll ever get out of here, Red? Yeah, one day. When I have a long white beard and 2 marbles rolling around upstairs, that's when they'll let me out. Tell you where I'd go. Zihuatanejo. It's in Mexico, a little place on the Pacific Ocean. They say it has no memory. That's where I want to live the rest of my life. Warm place with no memory. Open up a little hotel, right on the beach. Buy some worthless old boat and fix it up new. Take my guests out charter fishing. In a place like that, I could use a man who knows how to get things. But to Red, this sounds like delusion. It sounds like Andy's losing his grip on reality. Over the years, he's watched as inmates were crushed by a dehumanizing system that left them institutionalized. It's why he sees hope as a dangerous thing. I don't think you ought to be doing this to yourself, Andy. It's a pipe dream. Mexico is all the way down there, and you're in here, and that's the way it is. Yeah, right. That's the way it is. I guess it comes down to a simple choice, really. Get busy living or get busy dying. Red starts to worry that Andy might hurt himself. Every man has a breaking point. He sees Andy going back to his cell with a length of rope, and it's the longest night of his life. The next morning, Andy doesn't come out of his cell, and Red fears for the worst. The guards get upset and impatient. Did Andy make it through the night? But he's not in his cell, and he's nowhere to be found. Somehow he's vanished, like a fart in the wind. But a closer look at the poster shows us a glimpse of the truth, a hidden tunnel that goes right through the wall. That is how Andy escaped from Shawshank prison, and by the time anyone noticed he was gone, all that was left was a muddy set of clothes, a bar of soap, and an old rock hammer. So how did he do it? It took 19 years, but Andy used his tiny hammer to dig a tunnel straight through the wall. Andy loved rocks and geology. And geology is really the study of pressure and time. It's all it takes, really. Pressure and time. In prison, a man will do almost anything to keep his mind occupied. It turns out Andy's favorite hobby was toting his wall into the exercise yard, a handful at a time. It's a powerful analogy for overcoming any tough challenge in life. In her book Grit, psychologist Angela Lee Duckworth says that we often think that success comes down to things like intelligence, talent, or good looks. But her research shows us that these things matter far less than grit. Grit is perseverance combined with passion. It's the ability to face setbacks and roadblocks, but finding a way to keep going, even when you want to give up. But even more than that, it's built on following your deepest curiosities and doing the things you're passionate about. This combination is what motivates people to stick with what they're doing for years at a time. Dr. Duckworth studied kids and adults in all sorts of challenging settings, and she found that when people achieved the biggest dreams they had in life, it didn't come down to things like income or standardized test scores or physical health. It came down to grit, which was by far the best predictor. The good news is that grit is something you can develop over time through the choices you make. Maybe you're trying to beat an addiction, or you're trying to get out of debt, or you're trying to build a business you've always wanted to build. It might take you a decade to do it. But if the years go by and the time will pass anyway, why not go after it? Why not dream the impossible dream? On the night of his escape, Andy packs up the last of his things. He crawls through the tunnel, a narrow passage in the dark. From here, there's a pipe that leads to the outside, but it's filled with sewage. 500 yards of the most foul and disgusting filth you can imagine, and he would have to crawl through all of it to make it to freedom. It's an exhausting and grueling journey, but when he finally does, it's a huge moment of catharsis. The next morning, a man named Randall Stevens, seemingly conjured out of thin air, strolled into a Portland bank and withdrew the money the warden had tried to take for himself. Altogether, he walked out with more than $370,000, severance for 19 years of wrongful imprisonment. And with that, he left town to live his dream in Zihuatanejo. You can think of the Shawshank Redemption as a modern myth for anyone trying to free themselves from a bad situation. And as Joseph Campbell said, every myth is psychologically symbolic. Its narratives and images are to be read not literally, but as metaphors. So what's the deeper meaning in Andy's story? An image we see over and over again is the symbol of the tunnel. For me, it represents what Campbell called the dark night of the soul. It's the idea that in every human life, there comes a moment of crisis where it feels like our lives are falling apart. Maybe you lose your job, maybe you lose a loved one, or your health takes a hit. Whatever it is, the things you thought you could rely on completely slip away. But even though it feels like your world is collapsing, it's actually a crucial step in your life story. You can't go back to the old life you knew because it's gone, and you can't stay where you are. So the only way forward is to go through a kind of symbolic death, where you leave behind an old self and an old story, so that a new one can begin. This is what Brooks struggled with and ultimately failed to do. His dark night of the soul was a crisis of meaning that he couldn't see any way out of, so he fell into despair. But Andy's escape is a metaphor for finding freedom through resurrection, discarding an old identity and recreating a new one as a free man. To do that, he has to cross the tunnel. Campbell says that always when you're going through a long tunnel, anxiety comes along. But all you have to do to transform your hell into a paradise is to turn your fall into a voluntary act. The tunnel represents a new birth. When each of us is born, we have to pass through a birth canal, a tunnel. It's a painful process, but that's how each of us comes into the world. And there is no coming to consciousness without pain. This idea of rebirth is hinted at visually in this scene. The warden finds this hole in the poster, and it goes through the woman's womb, a symbolic passage to freedom. Tunnels are also something many people report seeing when they've had a near-death experience. They talk about passing through a tunnel and moving towards a brilliant, bright light. It hints at the idea that death isn't the end, but actually a portal into a new way of being. And so the tunnel is a universal human symbol for spiritual transformation. Some authors like Sam Candler have even written that the tomb of Christ was also a kind of tunnel. And we see a lot of parallels with the story of Christ's death and resurrection in the tomb and Andy's escape from the prison cell. In both cases, they transcend their physical suffering and find a path to freedom through the divine. And so the film presents us with two symbolic paths. Brooks is the pessimist who's lost all hope for the future, and Andy is the idealist who never stops believing in the power of hope. But most of us are somewhere in between. We're like Red. We want to live in a more hopeful way, but we aren't sure how to do it. So what does it mean to live in a more hopeful way? The film hints at this again through the symbolism of birds. After Andy escapes, Red says that, "Sometimes it makes me sad, Andy being gone. I have to remind myself that some birds aren't meant to be caged. Their feathers are just too bright, and when they fly away, the part of you that knows it was a sin to lock them up does rejoice. But still, the place you live in is that more drab and empty that they're gone." Birds are a metaphor for hope, but they also symbolize that part inside all of us that wants to be set free. You can call it the soul, the spark of the divine, or the human spirit, but it speaks to that inexpressible part of us that no one can touch or take away. Real freedom and transcendence can only come from restoring our connection with that part of who we are. And so there's only one question left. Can Red cross the tunnel himself? Can he face his own dark night of the soul and remake his life story? After 40 years in prison, Red's finally released. But he spent so much of his life in Shawshank, he's not sure if he can make it on the outside. "I'm an institutional man now, just like Brooks was." He finds himself moving into the same room Brooks lived in. He works at the same store Brooks worked at. He struggles with life on the outside, the same way Brooks did. "All I do anymore is think of ways to break my parole, so maybe they'll send me back. It's a terrible thing to live in fear. All I want is to be back where things make sense, where I don't have to be afraid all the time. Only one thing stops me, a promise I made to Andy." Red finds a letter with money and instructions on how to find Andy in Zihuatanejo. And for me, this is the most important symbol in the film. What does it mean? We're told that Zihuatanejo is a place where Andy and Red might someday meet again as free men. And I think that Andy and Red really represent different aspects of ourselves. Red is the realist who lives and operates in the world as it is, and not the way he wishes it might be. And Andy is the idealist and the dreamer who sees possibilities that don't yet exist, but could if we were only bold enough to make them real. Both are important, and we need both of them to become whole. It's what Jung called individuation, the process of bringing together all the different parts of the self. It's making the unconscious conscious and reclaiming the things we thought we lost so we can become who we really are. Andy says that Zihuatanejo is a warm place with no memory, a place where old things are fixed up new. And so it's a place where the soul, after passing through all that darkness, finally finds light. The dark night of the soul comes just before revelation, when everything is lost and all seems dark. Then comes new life and all that is needed. That's what redemption is. The idea that no matter what's happened, no matter what you've done or what mistakes you've made, you can always begin again and tell a new story. The real redemption in the film is Red's. Andy's journey is his literal escape from prison, but the film is really about Red's inner transformation, how he finds the courage to let go of his pessimism and take his own leap into an unknown future. And no one can take that journey without hope. Hope is what keeps us going in the face of tragedy and loss. Hope is what kept Solzhenitsyn alive in the gulags. And it's the same basic insight that all the teachers and all the poets and artists of the past have been trying to tell us. That as broken and divided as our world might seem, it's possible to heal it. Hope is a healing force, and so even as we must accept finite disappointment, we must never lose infinite hope. In the end, Red's spiritual transformation mirrors the possibility of our own. And for the first time in his life, he dares to hope. Get busy living or get busy dying. I find him so excited I can barely sit still or hold a thought in my head. A free man at the start of a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain. I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is as blue as it has been in my dreams. I hope. There are so many more symbols and metaphors I couldn't include in this video because it would have made it impractically long. Like the idea of the world as a kind of unconscious prison, the idea of the warden as a kind of unwitting architect of that world, and a redeemer figure who reveals the truth of how to escape it. These are all ideas that relate to a philosophy known as Gnosticism, and it's something we see over and over again in a lot of different movies. But why do so many stories share these same elements? And what's the deeper message here? Once you see it, it's impossible to unsee, and that's what we'll look at in the next video. I also have a free email newsletter where I share exclusive, never-before-seen content and videos you won't find anywhere else. It's completely free, and you can find it on my website and in the description. As always, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.